I'm Danielle Knapp. I'm the McCosh curator here at the JSMA, and I'd like to begin by sharing a land acknowledgement. The University of Oregon is located on Kalapuya Ilihi, the indigenous traditional homeland of the Kalapuya people, and following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homelands by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. Today, descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians of Oregon, and continue to make important contributions in their communities at UO and across the land we now refer to as Oregon. Together with my colleagues on the curatorial staff and faculty partners in our faculty engagement working group and a number of other campus partners and students, we developed the exhibition that's now on view upstairs, On Earth, A Fragile Existence, which pulls from our permanent collection that address a number of issues, including humans' interactions with the more than human world and our natural spaces. And On Earth responds to the UO's Environment Initiative for a campus-wide coordinated effort to create an intellectual and active hub focused on higher education's role and contribution to a just and livable future. The exhibition upstairs, which will be on view until early September, asks us to consider how do artists and artwork speak to our understanding of our own roles and responsibilities on our shared planet, and what can we learn from looking at and talking about what we see here. And the exhibition labels include the voices of curators, some of the artists, a number of students in the History of Art and Architecture and the Environmental Sciences Studies and Policy program. And we hope you spend some time with the exhibition and think about the different perspectives and stories represented there. So with these questions in mind, I'm very grateful that our colleague, Professor Emily Eliza Scott, introduced us to today's speaker, an artist and researcher whose work will ignite these curiosities and more in her talk with us today. Nina Elder, in her work, creates projects that reveal humanity's dependence on and interruption of the natural world. With a focus on changing cultures and ecologies, Nina advocates for collaboration, fostering relationships between institutions, artists, scientists, and diverse communities. And she's the co-founder of the Wheelhouse Institute, a women's climate leadership initiative, and has exhibited widely and been recognized for her work by a number of foundations and institutions and featured prominently in a number of resources. It has a great website with wonderful information about all the projects you've been working on. And she's been on campus and all around Oregon for the past several days, engaging with faculty and students. I think many people in this room, so thank you for joining us today, and other artists and thinkers. And we're so glad that she is here this afternoon in her busy week to share the performative lecture, Geologic Empathy and Quantum Curiosity. So go ahead, Nina, welcome you here.
All right. It's amazing that this lecture was organized so quickly and that there's so many people in this room, and I'm just so thankful for that. And oh my gosh, to Emily for helping plan this, and Liska for inviting me to the university to start with, Danielle for making space at the museum, the Fuller Initiative, which I don't know if everyone in this room is aware of the work that they do with the landscape architecture program, but pretty incredible program. And to this museum, I've learned a little bit about its legacy, and it's powerful and amazing. So we're going to start with a little bit of an exercise. I want you to sit quietly for a moment and think about something that you're very curious about, a skill that you would like to develop, a mystery that you feel compelled to solve, a place that calls to you. For me, I'm really interested in how birds navigate on their migrations. I'm also really interested in fancy clapping, like that kind of stuff. You know, it's like, I'm really interested in that. It might be a dance that your body craves, a language that you want to feel in your mouth, a person you'd like to know, a meal you want to create. Put a name to it in your mind, just simply, and say it to someone who's sitting close to you, without conversation. Go for it. Like, I'm serious, talk to each other. No conversation, don't ask why. Just say it. All right, good? Okay. Well done. I hope you learned about the person sitting close to you and their curiosity. To me, curiosity is just the greatest motivating force, and I'm so greatly indebted to all the people who have shared stories with me, given me feedback on my practice, and helped me feel like I take shelter in what I do. So I'm going to speak for about 45 minutes, show some of my art, share some stories, read an excerpt from my book, so get comfy, and I'll answer questions afterwards. And I know there's some students here that maybe had specific questions, so if you feel like you can't stay for a full Q&A, I won't be offended if you need to dart out at any point. The places where we are informed by interruption and violence. These are places where one version of time interrupted an older version of time. I acknowledge the indigenous people who utilize and live on this land. We are on Kalapuya land. I might have mispronounced that. That's a product of being a settler. I'm trying. I recognize this current state of being as the direct result of violence and colonialism. That history foregrounds all action and understanding. And I deeply respect the ongoing indigenous practices on this land, and I'm thankful to be here. So I've been thinking about accumulations. Not only the piles of stuff that I make work about, but the accumulations of things that I've taken on in my lifetime. I've always been deeply curious about where we come from and where we are going, and this opportunity allows me to investigate this. I have the desire to look back and understand the history of land and people. In this moment, I feel confronted by and scared by and activated by the future. Being an artist has allowed me to bring all this along, curiosity, fear, observation, and vision, to help imagine potential futures. I think we all need to learn from each other. We in this room. How can we use this privilege to be amplifiers of that which is under threat? How can we use these connections that you have professionally and as students and as a community to hold sacred what sustains life? And how can I use this privilege to create more opportunities for curiosity, empathy, and vibrant futures? So thank you for joining me in this. I make work about disruptions. I'm obsessed with holes in the ground and piles of rocks. The piles of rocks that are the subject matter of my drawings are the innards of the earth that after millennia of geologic time are taken from their homes, turned inside out, stripped of their minerals, and then left to geologic time again. They have a slow yet disrupted relationship to natural entropy. The scars in the landscape will surely last longer than these drawings of them. Medicines, machines, money, the materials in our homes and cleaning products and art supplies, they are all dependent on mineral extraction. We exhume our daily needs from the earth. These holes and piles, these things that we often do not want to look at, these illustrate what we value. My ongoing question are whether these are disaster sites, or might they be monuments to human productivity? I question the resiliency of a natural environment barraged with industrial veracity. So I started going to Alaska, and I know a lot of you have Alaska connections, which I love, to hang out in this place, the Wrangell St. Elias Wilderness. Has anyone been there? I know a few of you have, right on. It's deep within a 13.2 million acre wilderness is this town called McCarthy and a mine named Kennecott. I started going there because this place is overflowing with both piles of mining detritus and glacial moraines, and I find both fascinating. Alaska is now a magnet for me, and I feel incredibly lucky to have continuing relationships to this land and the people who live there. Even today, the town of McCarthy is very remote. It's at the end of a rough 62-mile-long dirt road with no running water and no electricity. The few people who live there are strong and creative and deeply connected to the land and the seasons that dictate them. And I can't give a talk without showing these images. People always say, do you see bears? And I'm like, do I see bears? I see them do things like put traffic cones on their heads and dance with each other. So this has really nothing to do with anything, but you all need to see dancing bears and traffic cones. And anyways, so, okay. Whew. Let me have a sip of water after that. So I became fascinated with the kind of people and power that it took to extract metal from these mountains. The Kennecott Corporation was backed by the Guggenheims, like the Guggenheim Museums, and the Morgans that we now know from JP Morgan Bank. In the early 1900s, the Kennecott Corporation saw the potential to build what we now think of as the grid. Electricity and indoor plumbing were possible on a national scale, but they needed copper. So, when in 1904, a surveyor named Tarantula Jack stumbled upon a mountain of almost pure metal, it kind of seemed like a joke. How in the world could millions of tons of copper be removed from towering mountains, across gigantic glaciers, across roaring and unpredictable rivers, to the closest American port city that was nearly 2,000 miles away? Well, greed does amazing things, my friend. In less than 5 years, the corporation had built a $25 million railroad. They created a port city from scratch, and they started mining. The copper from this mine allowed for electricity, the telephone, and indoor plumbing to happen. There is copper in circulation today that came out of this remote place. And when I'm showing this slide, I like to point out there's this tram station at the lower left-hand corner of the image, and the mines that I work with are farther up that mountain. So when I first started going to McCarthy, I wanted to hate the mine. I'm an environmentalist. But the more I learned, the more I became purely fascinated and attracted to the complexity of this place. Kennecott employed mainly immigrants and gave them the best medical care, education, pay, and benefits of anywhere in the world. And actually, the level of environmental contamination was low enough that we still drink from the creeks and streams today. The scale of human ambition is astounding, the level of innovation remarkable. When viewed as a historical site, which is now managed by the US National Parks, Kennecott sparks imagination and weird reverence. And what really blows my mind is how one place can show us politics, power, and something of humankind. And not just in our lifetimes, but so far into the future. The past of the Kennecott Corporation will play out for a very, very long time. The consolidated power around the mine forced the US government to create anti-monopoly laws. The amount of wealth it created changed the social structure of the entire world. And this one endeavor made transnational corporations the reality that we live with today. I made a series of large drawings of the mines that the Kennecott Corporation owns. Unlike that first mine in Alaska, these are renowned for their voracious consumption of space and their unparalleled environmental impact. Through international subsidiary agreements, Kennecott now has active operations on 6 of the 7 continents and over 1,000 different names under which they do business. This mine appears so dark and so deep that it makes me think about the Earth spinning on its axis, and if humans moving this vast weight of material around the globe might someday disturb the perfect celestial balance. The Kennecott subsidiary corporations have an annual worth of around $147 billion. They are infamous for their human rights violations. They are huge yet nimble acrobats in the world of finance, law, and international commerce. These drawings took me years to complete, and I feel it is my duty to contemplate and represent their greedy perforation of the planet. The Escondida mine in Peru has consumed over 800 square miles of rainforest and indigenous lands. Through the months it takes me to draw these, I'm deeply contemplative. I am memorializing wilderness lost, ecosystems destroyed, and homes bulldozed. The Grasberg pit in Indonesia was closed for years, and has now been reopened to provide rare earth elements for electronic devices. None of our cell phones or computers would work without this hole in the ground. You are probably holding a device right now that came out of this hole in the ground. We all benefit in myriad ways from this void. So in this digital age of connectivity, I really want to look beyond my computer screen, beyond my iPhone, and I want to connect to this place. I need to acknowledge that this place sustains me. So fast forwarding a little bit or rewinding a little bit, depending on how we look at geologic time, the Kennecott Corporation was really voracious and kind of lacking ethics. And they joined in a bidding war on what is called the Ontanagon Boulder. The solid copper boulder is a revered and sacred object to the Anishinaabe people. Its spirit called upon to improve health and well-being. It was, quote, discovered by a European explorer in 1820, kicking off a contest of greed and extraction. For over 100 years, the boulder was carted around the United States, bought and sold and treated like a mineralogical freak show. Finally, the US government, with funds from the Kennecott Corporation, moved the boulder to the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. Because it weighs such a huge amount, the only place in the museum that was structurally strong enough to support its mass was in the basement, next to the service elevator, where no one, including Anishinaabe people, can visit it. In 1991, an assessment was initiated after the Keweenaw Bay Indian community requested the return of the Ontanagon Boulder as a sacred object. Repatriation hearings, quote, indicate that there is insufficient evidence to establish that the boulder, or any natural object for that matter, fits the definition of a sacred object under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, known as NAGPRA, end quote. And I'll just point out while I have this image up that there's shoe scuff marks on the wall and some wadded up Kleenex in the corner behind the boulder. It's obviously been used as kind of a stepping stool. I contacted folks who work at NAGPRA and cultural leaders from the Keweenaw Bay community. How can a museum hold a sacred stone hostage? How does a community memorialize what is gone? Gary, the director of tribal history of the Tribal History Office, told me that it's so complicated because his people don't believe in the ownership of sacred objects. They are to be held in common with all, including his grandkids, scientists, museum curators, and people like me. The boulder is not sovereign as a thing, but sovereign as part of a place. At the center of this, Gary identified a void, an echoing space left by dominion, colonialism, and exploitation. When two cultures have such different values, there is dissonance that echoes in that void. But instead of trying to find harmony, the Smithsonian keeps the boulder in the basement. I made this drawing to honor and bring attention to the story. I need to learn about and advocate for Indigenous sovereignty in all ways. The places that we call home, the knowledges we depend on, the resources that fuel our lives. I am reckoning with their simultaneous sacredness and exploitation. So if we're looking at the voids and the colonists who caused them, we encounter this guy, Robert Peary. The same year that copper was found in Alaska, he developed a fever to be the first person, i.e. the first person of European descent to approach the North Pole. This is a before and after image resulting from his northern obsession. I hope I don't end up looking like the image on the right, but it might happen. Anyways, Peary spent 19 years bouncing between Greenland and New York, raising money and bolstering confidence that Americans should be the first to reach the greatest mystery on the planet. At that point, they thought the North Pole was maybe like a tropical, paradise or a huge hole that all the waters in the oceans cycled through. It was very, very mysterious, and people thought would be just a bounty, like a fountain of youth almost. So I don't know if any of you have been to the North Pole, but I don't really believe it's like that. But meanwhile, Canada and Alaska were thoroughly overrun by the Hudson Bay Company. They were the de facto governing body for all of the North. At the height of their power, there were 3 million square miles under their trade jurisdiction, which also meant they were building trading posts and military forts. They were waging war as they were spreading disease and religion. They were making the maps and writing the history. With the spoils of their wars, the Hudson Bay Company filled the displays and archives of American museums. Peary's backers included major American industrialists who were making their millions from mining, logging, whaling, and trapping. They desired new financial frontiers up north and new curiosities to marvel at home, and Peary was their man. But unlike the interior of Canada, Greenland was not a treasure trove of timber and beaver pelts and gold. How could Peary continue to incentivize his funders if all he was encountering was ice and Inuit people? He sought fame, they sought fortune. What resulted is one of the most unfortunate stories, one that still taints how institutions relate to the North. Peary lived among the Inuit people of Western Greenland on and off for 18 years. He depended on them for everything: food, shelter, fuel, clothes. But somehow he kind of had this savior complex. His nickname among the Inuit was the Great Tormentor. I think he was probably a real jerk. Peary learned of masses of unidentified metal that were scattered across the region of Greenland, known as Iron Mountain. The Inuit names for these huge rocks translate to woman and dog and knife and tent. They were held at the same status as the most important elements of survival and culture in the Arctic. And most importantly, they are considered the ancestors, the seeds of humanity that fell to Earth. The masses were quickly identified by Peary as meteorites, not ancestors, each weighing up to 35 tons. It took Peary 3 years to remove them. He went back and forth to New York. He brought up timber and metal and chains. He built a small railroad and re-engineered the capacity of his boats. In 1894, he set sail with the scientific specimen and 6 Inuit people. The living specimen included Monique, age 6, his father, and 4 other people. Monique's the young kid in this photograph. Upon arrival, all were put on display in the American Museum of Natural History, meteorites and people alike. Guests paid an extra 25 cents to see what was advertised as the Living Eskimo exhibit. The museum was unprepared to deal with living humans, and the staff left them to survive in the basement. It's a long and terrible story, but only Monique survived. The museum defleshed the bones of his friends and family and put the skeletons on display in the anthropology exhibit. What absence of ethics allowed this to happen? What absolute dismissal of humanity? There were countless opportunities to take steps towards healing the trauma, yet they were totally ignored. This is Monique at age 27, by the way. Finally, in 1993, that's not very long ago, the museum began the process of repatriation and burial of the Inuit bones and artifacts. There was no longer a community centered around Iron Mountain. Their reliance on trade with the Arctic explorers and the introduction of disease had undermined their land-based existence. The Greenland Meteorites are the most studied and most prominently displayed in the world, yet their terrestrial story is nearly omitted from history. It was important for me to find this story in people and in place, not in a museum and not in a book. So through Facebook and internet research and friends of friends, I met descendants of the Iron Mountain Inuit, all now living in European cities. They refer to the past as something that has holes in it, something that has been partially erased, something incomplete. They are people who feel squeezed to the margins, where science and mining and oil extraction are central. I made this drawing to honor the Iron Mountain Inuit and to undo Peary's removal of the sacred. The drawing's about 4 feet by 5 feet and is drawn using charcoal, unpulverized space material provided by NASA. Peary is a celebrated man. Part of Greenland is named after him. Many museums celebrate his collections and contributions. Bowdoin College in Maine has the Robert Peary Arctic Museum. The US created an honorary stamp for him. Meanwhile, Monique and his entire culture nearly became scientific specimens, things that are valued to study, uprooted from home and denied sovereignty. There are countless other meteorites, many from this area, that have been stolen from other people. Nearly all space objects that come to Earth are revered by indigenous people, and all are coveted by science. They hold secrets of the universe and the most rare of minerals. They are the only objects that allow us to touch space, the heavens, and deep time. I have explored these cultural conflicts and have made many drawings. In these voids, through these erasures, I'm trying to return their meteorites to their homes. So, in trying to understand greed and metal and really big systems, I apologize to the geologists in the room, but we're gonna do this. I needed to rewind even further. I want to understand where it all comes from. So what I learned is that Western science believes that 4.5 billion years ago, the cosmic dance got a little too close and a little too clumsy, and everything got sucked into a black hole. There was a gigantic collision, and things started spinning around each other and spinning out. A galactic wind blew, the lighter stuff got flung away, leaving heavy planetary bodies swirling around each other. The Earth's hard crust formed around a core of molten space particles. Tectonic plates smashed and crashed, volcanoes burped, continents formed, and bada bing, we have life on planet Earth. You never need to take a geology class ever again. Just joking. So because of all of this smashing and crashing, this planet that we think of as home is really a mixed up mess of exploded stars, planetary offspring, and things blown here by space wind. Many of the things we value most, gold, titanium, platinum, were immigrants to planet Earth in the form of meteorites. They were folded into the Earth's core and now are expelled through the grinding, crunching, burping, and erupting forces of geology. It is the meteorites, both on the surface of the Earth and below it, that seem to magnetize human desire. Trying to understand how the universe began, it made me question this void that exists in colonized spaces, that often exists in memories, and that now exists prominently in my art. The universe began in a void with a wild collision, and the impossible became possible. I'll gulp water with this happy picture of me. So, a couple years ago, I went to go live in the Klondike goldfields for a while. I was super excited to be there, as I'm sure you can tell in the look of my face. I kind of am embarrassed, but I love huge machines. But this is the place that caused one of the largest waves of human immigration to scale at the time, the Klondike Gold Rush. In 1896, there were rumors of rivers that flowed with gold and mountains of solid metal. Before the gold was discovered, about 8,000 indigenous people lived on this land. It is just below the Arctic Circle, and human life was close to the cycles of the sun, of snow and ice, of caribou and bison. Later, more than 100,000 new people flooded in with pickaxes and shovels and greed. They hauled themselves across oceans, over mountains, across international borders. People still toil these soils, seeking their dreams, hungry for fallen stars, looking for a bonanza. As I shared meals and beers and stories with the miners, I realized that we were really similar. We creative folk and those hardworking miners, we all seek a glimmer, the unseen sparkle. We imagine a reality where, through our unique labors, we unearth some great bounty. We are willing to smash ourselves into hard places, work ourselves to exhaustion, follow our vision. If we are lucky, we find that glimmer. And once we have it in hand, that bright thing, we have to convince other people that what we have done is valuable. We ask other people to believe in us, invest in us, have faith that we can keep producing the bright, shiny thing. It is beautiful to work with conviction and dedication. It is wonderful to believe that there is a soft sparkle in the hardest and darkest of places. But at the same time, I find myself horrified that I'm so sympathetic with the miners. I'm supposed to be an environmentalist. But living among mines, I've realized that without them and their backbreaking work, moments like this would not be possible. This projector, this screen, my camera that took the photos, the seats you're sitting in, the glasses I am wearing, the car that drove you here. A miner pulled all of those elements from the earth. We're wearing them and sitting with them right now. And I've always been interested in mines. I just found this photo. It's my 6th birthday. I'm the little one with a serious look on her face. And I asked my family if we could go on an underground tour of the Molly Kathleen mine in Cripple Creek for my birthday. I remember it so clearly, the simultaneous attraction and repulsion of the dark tunnels and the uncanny presence of our living bodies in a place where they should never be. I was aware after this and throughout my whole childhood of the weird dissonance between the quaint ski towns in Colorado, where I grew up, and the underground labyrinths that created those towns. I could not then and cannot now reckon with this geologic dysmorphia. Beginning to understand that as humans we exist within ecologies is the most important lesson that I'm trying to learn about the way we can move into the future. The word ecology represents the act of living together. In Latin, oeko means coming together, which derives from the ancient Greek oikos, which translates to household or hearth. When you imagine all that comes together to make a home, shelter, nourishment, a place to rest, to feel safe, a place to love and create and share, that is what needs protection in this time of environmental precarity. I'm really interested in what happens when our home changes. How do we respond when we need to respond at increasingly uncomfortable speeds? I am thinking about how we can continue creating in times of unprecedented loss. And I feel a really strange whiplash between the urgency of climate change and my desire to slow down and relish the world that surrounds me. Everything seems to be speeding up, yet part of me just wants to hug my sister, go for a hike, eat a burrito, read a book, and pet my dogs. Those are my dogs. That sensation is the psychological condition of solastalgia. This word comes from a combination of the solace that is felt regarding home and the sensation of impending change, a remembering and longing for that solace. Solastalgia was coined by the environmental philosopher Glenn Albrecht in 2005. Although it's a reasonably new term, I think it's one of the most unifying and ubiquitous sensations. Solastalgia is a premonition of transition, a sense of grief for an anticipated future. Solastalgia is anxiety about change from a perspective of wholeness. It is a feeling of homesickness before leaving home. Solastalgia describes that we cannot prevent ourselves from moving into the future. Yet in the future, we will miss this moment. I wonder how we can acclimate ourselves to change, to be more nimble, to move with intention into the futures. So, as the pandemic and the pandemonium of it all set in, I was really aware of my solastalgia. I feel that my comforts and my communities are fraying. The systems I depend on are transforming. I know the future will not be the same, and because I cannot imagine it, I feel a bit lost. I made these series of drawings in the first month of quarantine. A lot of my soul nostalgia is felt for things that have broken or are breaking, things that are viewed as exhausted or obsolete. In these broken forms, I see all the trust that was invested here, all the strength that this object once exuded, and that the aura of those relationships does not go away. This object is done doing what it was intended to do, but it keeps being something. I want to honor it and meditate upon it as a document of past strength. While this shift towards much smaller and personally scaled objects felt really strange to me, it suddenly doesn't feel superficial to be spending time finding beauty in the breakage and looking at the fibers that held strong as long as they could. I look back on my growth as an artist, and I see that I needed to let my heart break for pit mines and bomb craters. And now I can unfurl my attention and a curiosity at a more personal scale. This work of questioning what sustains us led me to seek out what keeps folks stable during continual upheaval and change. I sought out people who live in relationship with the ocean, those who manage with the tides, the never-ending friction and erosion. Beginning in Homer, Alaska last winter, continuing in Maine this past year, and a little bit here yesterday in Oregon, I've been meeting with fishermen who harvest from the ocean and navigate the growing instability of extreme climate, extreme weather, and the daily, seasonal, yearly changes. I'm fascinated by the simultaneous tension and trust, fraying and fixing that define their literal lifelines. I have seen through my research that people who often get ignored by science have profound, long-term, intergenerational knowledge of what baselines are shifting and what might happen in the future. I have cherished the conversations, especially with people who might not use the word climate change, but who have been transparent about how their anchor lines are straining. In these stormy times, it has felt right to not depict what these ropes are tethered to. There's something mysterious that keeps people from getting swept away. And I'm starting to see these drawings as a celebration of those dark, individual places. The greatest teacher that I have when it comes to thinking about change is glaciers. We talk about mountains as the most immovable of entities, yet these glaciers are carving and shaping the landscapes around them. They literally gouge and rip and rumble as though they're bulldozers. Glaciers are at once vulnerable and immensely strong. This is what a receding glacier looks like. This is basically my backyard when I'm in Alaska. It has so much earth in it that it no longer looks like ice, but like an industrial scrape, a gravel pit. The phenomena that's happening here is called back-wasting, which I think is so poetic. As a glacier retreats, a huge weight is lifted from the earth. The freshly exposed land gains a bit of elevation in a process called isostatic rebound. A huge burden has been removed. The earth breathes in, it expands, it decompresses. The land becomes softer and less dense. Those space particles that were smashed together 4 billion years ago want a bit more space, a bit less pressure. The planet seeks equilibrium. An erratic is a rock that has been transported by a glacier and then expelled once the glacier has melted. An erratic signifies the time and place where the glacier originated, often hundreds of miles and hundreds of years distant. Erratics hold traces of the parent bedrock, the path that the glacier traveled, and the process of deposition. Erratics are time travelers, treasure troves, reliquaries, and rubble. Encountering an erratic is akin to encountering a piece of sculpture. They are often perched in surprising locations with an unstable and alien appearance. The material presence of an erratic is strange and mismatched to its surroundings. It is often not clear how this solitary rock arrived, alone, an anomaly. Erratics have a newness, a vulnerability, and an awkwardness. They have meaning and promise and poetry that often remains a mystery. Because I'm an artist, I ponder what I am carrying within myself and what evidence my life will leave. What are we creating that will get swept forward, borne along in the destructive path of time, and be deposited in the future? What truths of our now and here will tumble along, resilient and intact, into another here and another now? What are the unintentional offspring of our actions? What monsters and miracles and mysteries will remain in our wake? What things will hold our essence as the maker, as the origination point? How will our objects and words move into the river of time and maintain their integrity? In some distant time and place, what will they reveal of our time and our intention? To be in denial of change is not only unnatural, but it doesn't allow for a more holistic future to emerge. When we start to implicate ourselves in the change, we go through the growing pains, but we also learn how to be nimble. I've often stated that it will not be the same, but it might be beautiful, which has become the title for a new body of work. It's a multimedia project that addresses change and impermanence, looking to breakage and emergence, human legacies, and geologic time. These are puzzle stones. They're some of my favorite things on the planet. They're rocks that have been shattered by extreme temperature shifts. In Alaska, they look this way because they've recently been ejected by a glacier. They are enigmatic and alluring, fragile and strong. I've been inspired to make this work because we can witness these rocks in the midst of their ultimate transformation. This time of rapid change asks us to be involved and responsive as it happens, to be at home within the change. We can't wait to see how the world remakes itself. I'm finding it increasingly important to explore how we care for something, even as it crumbles. I started this work because I often feel that the world is in pieces, and I'm not sure I have a way to reassemble it. It's something I'd love to talk with you all about. But this state of insecurity and crumbling does not make me stop seeking what might come next. Because I know this planet is forever impacted by my actions, does not mean I abandon hope. To acknowledge our roles in systemic oppression and injustice doesn't mean we fixed the problem. I wanted to see what would happen if I asked people to carefully and self-consciously pick up these rocks that are very unstable. How do we engage with change and take an active role in change, even if that's very uncomfortable? After creating those videos in the field next to glaciers, my cinematographer Mike and I worked with a wide range of people in Anchorage, asking them to attempt to reassemble the shattered stones. It was so meaningful to spend time discussing how we feel about the future, what changes we observe, and what we are going to do with the pieces of what once was. The video is looping and nonlinear. It jumbles up hope and hubris and futility and human fallibility. I love how it focuses on creativity and care. Throughout this past winter, it was projected on the massive front of the Anchorage Museum through the dark months of winter, and I couldn't have been happier. It looked great. So part of that project are these drawings that are large and made of forest fire charcoal and glacial silt and industrial pulp mill waste. Drawing these tiny details at a large scale is a way for me to look at the fractures, to see what has broken and what remains. I feel haunted by this work, this acknowledgement of brokenness, but it's necessary. I want to assert that even though the future is unknowable and unthinkable, there's ways to act for betterment. So it began as a title for the work. And these rocks, these social interactions, these drawings, the video, they are helping me understand that it will not be the same, but it might be beautiful. Slight change of pace. So this past summer, I chose to spend time in Bisbee, Arizona. Has anyone been to Bisbee? A few people, all right. It's a really interesting place. It's a mining town built into the walls of this canyon that is slowly being widened into a pit mine. I thought, obviously, I was going to make work about this big hole in the ground. And then I discovered this place, just down the hill, on the US-Mexico border. From 1904 until 1987, the Dodge Phelps Company operated a smelter and was subsidized by the United States government. Now it is a series of man-made mesas that hulk, black and dark and strange. I had to know them. I'm no geologist or mining expert, but here's what I understand happened. I'm sure the geologists in the room can sneeze at this, so they dug out that gigantic hole in the ground, crushed up the rocks, and soaked the rock powder in massive tanks full of arsenic and acid. Copper separates from rock in those bizarre conditions, so they took out the poisonous copper sludge, heated it to a bazillion degrees, took the copper to make electric wiring for your house and computer and this room, and then squirted the leftover stuff, I don't know if it still is rocks, into these huge piles. This place is bigger than I can convey. Walking on the piles, there is a horrifying tinkling sound, as though the sovereign sound of the rock has been stolen. Everything is iridescent and brittle and breaking, their integrity gone. The rocks weigh an unbelievable amount. My tears evaporated from my face. My shoes melted. I filled my sundress pockets full of rocks, holding them away from my body so that they would not burn me. This was the borderlands in August, so it was very hot out. I do not know if these things still count as rocks. If a geologist can answer that, I'm really curious. I have a sense that any essence of geology has been taken from them. The more I thought about the slag, the less power I had to turn away from the piles. I had never witnessed the blatant weaponization of land like I did here. Here, the US-Mexico border has been turned into one of the most acidic places on the planet. Here, trees die and the air smells of sulfur. Here, a human body stands out in stark contrast to the iridescent blackness. Here are the wastelands of capitalism. Here is a monument to our addiction to electricity and convenience. And here is the hunting ground for Border Patrol. It is a place for death along the US-Mexico border. I had the desire to cradle the slag, to hold it to my body, to learn from it. I sewed a series of contraptions that helped me lift and hold these very heavy things. I wanted to use my strength and my softness to restore some dignity to these rocks. By definition, to overburden is to give someone a weight that is too great to carry. Additionally, an overburden refers to the geologic material that is removed to expose a desired underground mineral. My sister came down to the border and helped me film. I was scared. I was really, really hot, like 118 degrees hot. We were trespassing. The Border Patrol was swarming around us, ignoring us with our white skin. I did not know if the contraptions I made would actually work. I did not know if I was strong enough to do what I wanted to do. What scared me most was putting myself in my artwork for the first time. I've used my body to access all kinds of places, to do research, but never to actually convey the message. I had never allowed my instincts to move me so deeply. And watching this brand new footage now, I'm going to show you, when we're doing Q&A, I'm going to run the whole video and we can just chat. But I'm still learning what these instincts were. I feel the horrible transformation that these molecules went through. And part of me wants to say, yeah, me too. I've been through some shit. But as long as I still have muscles and bones and breath and sweat, I will celebrate you. I know that these man-made rocks are essentially made out of stardust and celestial magic. I feel the journey that they've been on. I want to dignify them as new beings, not something that has been crushed, melted, dumped, and forgotten. I am aligned with them, and so are you. They gave us our plumbing pipes, our electrical wires, our cell phone synapses. Their ease is our demise, and our flawed politics are expressed in their piles. I don't know how to say thank you to a rock, but this is the closest I've come. To this overburden, I give you my strength. I lift you from anonymity. I press you to my flesh. I call you precious and wonderful. I do everything I can to hold you, even if it hurts. I will cradle you, carry you, balance you through times of imbalance. I will meet you where you are now, how you are now. I acknowledge you as the foundation on which I stand, and I do not pretend that this foundation is stable. It is brittle, it is acidic, it is exhausting and exhausted. If I cannot carry you back to the mountain, I can try to be a mountain. If I cannot restore you to wholeness in the dark timefulness of geology, I will lift you in the light. My skin can scar and heal, my spine can straighten, my muscles can strain and shiver, but I do this to share my strength with you. So, in tandem with this very, very recent turn to working in video, I've also made a very deep personal investigation of the power of attention and intention. I've been fully nomadic for 6 years now, traveling for projects, teaching, and research opportunities, not having a home. By staying in motion, my world has been a blur of change. In the past few months, I committed to decrease that blur, to find more focus within the change. I'm so overwhelmed with gratitude and joy because I just bought some land in southwestern New Mexico. This is a picture of my land and my little tiny trailer and my outhouse. It's very small in the vastness. Talk about vastness. My new home is on the edge of a huge volcanic caldera that once held an inland sea. It is the traditional boundary between Navajo and Apache. It now holds a few ranches, a few people. My land is volcanic rubble, carpeted with grasses, studded with blown trees. I live without electricity, running water, cell phone, or internet. I plan to build something, but keep it very, very simple and off the grid. It's an experiment in solitude and a laboratory for paying attention. Through constant travel, I've been distracted from distinct, localized, palpable conditions of climate collapse. I have fled from the fluctuating solace of home in order to avoid solastalgia. I see that now. One of the main things that I've not wanted to reckon with is the extinction of the two-needle piñón. This is the state tree of New Mexico, and it's the keystone species for most of the American Southwest. Through anthropogenic disruptions, drought, beetles, temperature instability, the suppression of natural forest fire, science is now predicting an 80% decrease in piñón populations in the next 40 years. That's really soon. That means 4 out of 5 trees in my area will turn orange, drop their needles, and die. I turned 40 last year. I don't feel middle-aged, but it's most likely that I have about 40 years left. So the last half of my life will align with the last years of piñón life. It's an incredible responsibility and honor to share this life and death cycle. I wish I could save them, and I will try, but it's unlikely. I want to learn how to grieve, but not live in terror of loss. If I can provide hospice for my ecosystem, I will. If telling their story brings some elegance to their extinction, I will. My neighbor on my land is the Very Large Array, where scientists are listening to the depths of the cosmos. Has anyone been to the Very Large Array? Yes! I'm always excited when someone's been to these remote places. So while I'm contemplating the end time of trees, the neighbors are listening to stars being born. The contrast in scales is stunning. We are the asteroid. I keep thinking about this statement, written by Timothy Morton. We are the asteroid. That sparks my imagination. We are the asteroid. I think he wrote that to impart some terrible doom and apocalypse regarding the impact that we humans as a species are having. We are the asteroid. But from my neighbors at the Very Large Array, who took all these snazzy photos, I'm learning a little bit about asteroids. They orbit alongside the cosmic bodies, remembering that original peaceful dance. There are millions of them, safely and quietly moving. Every once in a while, one flashes into our atmosphere, causing a shooting star. A few fall to the Earth as meteorites, becoming sacred and scientifically compelling. So, yeah, maybe we are the asteroid. Maybe we could choose to silently orbit. Maybe we can destroy the Earth. Or maybe we are shooting stars. So I want you to remember that thing that you're curious about. Right now, you're carrying it like a glacial erratic. It might be heavy or it might be light. By telling your neighbor about it, you started to shine some light on it. It might be a shimmering ball of joy or a challenging new adventure. It might magnetize you like a meteorite or be as bewildering and terrifying as an asteroid. I hope you follow your curiosity and feel deeply along the way. Curiosity combined with empathy reveals that we are all carrying extraordinary weights and living extraordinary lives. We are brilliant, curious creatures living on a dancing ball of stardust, and anything is possible. So, thank you. I'm just going to play this video in the background, but we can have Q&A while this is playing. If it'll start, we'll see. All right, how do I do full screen? Any questions, comments, geologic points you'd like to argue and I will lose? Or nothing at all? Yeah.
I just think thank you for helping us navigate all this madness. Really beautiful.
My pleasure to help you navigate the madness. Yeah.
I'm always curious about where people began in their journeys, and I think that the relationship that you depict here between science, society, and art is really profound. So I'm wondering, what was your journey like into where you are today?
Mm-hmm. For the video camera, the question was my journey into science, society, and art, and where I began. I think that 6-year-old Nina going into the mine tunnel was pretty profound. My father worked for the military. He just died, and I found out he was doing a lot of biological weapons manufacturing, and was really involved with some very dirty, very physical aspects of how the U.S. government has expressed itself. And then on the flip side, my mother is a trauma therapist and dealing with people who have really extreme pain and trying to live with that. And I just see myself as like this confluence of those two ways of being, because I very much acknowledge the suffering that has been caused on this planet and that running away from it is not going to work. So I think that's a huge part of where I started. I also, let me get this started. I grew up in Colorado Springs. My dad worked at NORAD. I failed out of high school. And then I went on to get a master's degree in critical economic theory. So I'm kind of untrained in some aspects of the art that I make. I've never taken a drawing class, but I don't know. It's been a long and roundabout way of being. And I love field science. I think there's this incredible curiosity and desire to pick things up and understand them that often gets overlooked when we talk about the data of science. So because I've had access to field scientists, it's very magical, that part of it. Yeah. Yeah.
So you said that you're like a confluence. I like that. If you're a confluence, what would you say your ocean is?
Okay, the question was, if I'm a confluence, what's my ocean? That's an amazing question. I don't know. I'm really, really curious about curiosity as a phenomena, and I think I'm not joking. I take it utterly seriously when I say curiosity can save us. Like, I'm not a solutions-oriented person, but learning to see one another in our deep transformation and suffering, and by one another I mean humans, plants, animals, rocks, natural systems. So I know glaciers don't get to choose where they go, or rivers don't get to choose where they go. Maybe they do after several million years, but I think eroding and flowing towards greater curiosity and empathy is just, it's my life work. And I've taken a lot of weird risks to try to help other people become more curious. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm partly asking this because of, I feel so moved that I almost can't speak after you're talking.
Thanks. Or I guess thanks.
But watching the video on the screen now, I just would love to hear you talk more about this, what sounds to me like for you, a really significant and very meaningful addition to your work, to put your body into it, and how you relate to that kind of like offering your body into this site or to the documentation of it, offering it to us. Either sort of aspects of how that has felt for you, or how that relates to maybe a kind of sense that if this, like a particular moment of a kind of need for compassion or a moment of breakage, that became kind of a necessity to kind of enter that into the picture. So if you want to talk more about the body,
Yeah.
your body in this work.
Okay, so for the camera, the question was about my turn towards embodied work in landscapes and compassion and breakage and some of the transformation that led to this. Thanks for that's a great question. My drawings have always been a very embodied process for me. All of my drawing materials are things that I collect from sites. So the first drawings I ever made were of nuclear test sites and classified photographs of nuclear tests, and I drew them using radioactive charcoal that I harvested from around nuclear test sites. And so to me, there was this thing about putting my own body into the research process and thinking about all the people that don't have that choice and what it means to choose that. And it sounds a little bit absurd, and it is. I think that's the joy of being an artist, is we can follow these instincts, even if they're really scary. And for years and years and years, I mean, I've drawn out of so many strange materials. They make these like photorealistic drawings, and you look at the materials and you're like, what? That's made out of pulverized guns, or that's made out of chainsaw grease, or that's, it's just always strange. And I realized how invisible that was. Just the materiality doesn't have that personhood. And I thought it was a way to get people more tuned in, and I realized there's just this really fleeting relationship with art unless it's seen. and I'm doing this. I haven't done this before, the strapping things to myself, but I was always touching and caressing and carrying and really having a physical relationship to geology. And I think in the past 5 years, just some of the political strife and some of the realizing that climate science and climate actualities are not showing us the same thing. And so a lot of the confusion around it, I started trusting myself in a different way and going out to see these realities. My relationship with glaciers is just a deeply physical, personal one. I'm drinking the water that comes out of them. I'm living pressed up against them, and it's like a tiny ecosystem created by a glacier. So being in this different toxic landscape, all I could do was show it to people. It took, I broke into this place and I lied about me being allowed to be there, and I was able to do this long action through a series of gutsy, bizarre things. And I don't know if you all would know. By the way, I have not shown this work yet. This is brand new. It has a really interesting soundscape that goes with it, but I don't want to share that with you all just yet. But so I don't know how other people will read it. But yeah, there's something about, we're all implicated in this. We're all using copper that led to these smelter piles right now. I'm sure this microphone is came from this place. And then that toxic material is being used as a weapon against Mexican people and killing Mexican people. I can't just let that go. I have to risk something. I can't just walk away from that. So I don't know. There's a lot of empathy and a lot of lacking clarity. And I guess a question I would love to put to you all is if you think an individual action, and I'm not looking for compliments here, you can be like, no, it's bullshit. But if an individual action in a massive landscape and in a massive systemic problem can create some kind of, I'm cautious to use the word justice, but let's use that word. People call me an activist, and that makes me very uncomfortable because I'm not offering solutions. I'm asking questions. And I don't know what this work does yet. I haven't shown this. I have not been in major dialogue around this work. So I'm curious just to hear any thoughts or responses about the action of an individual within the evidence of a systemic problem. This is the problem and it's its evidence all at the same time. And you could be like, I don't think it does anything, and I'll totally accept that. Yeah.
This is a bit metaphoric, but if you think about it, even like a tiny stream of water just dropping, just a drop of water once a decade still builds these giant caves and stalagmites. And it may seem very small scale as compared to floods and rivers and oceans, but there's still change being made.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same way, just the fact that there is one person doing something could be much more impactful than just an absence of it.
I think that's why I did it. And it was I was in Erin's class the other day, and several of you said, well, where did you carry it? And I'm like, I don't think that there's a place that this can be carried because this substance shouldn't exist. So there's this futility, this never-ending futility to try to carry away one of the worst places on the planet. But yeah, thank you. I love the confluence, the dripping water. I'm feeling really watery today. It's great. I'm usually feeling pretty rocky. Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for all this work. It's incredible. And I am curious about conversations, how you navigate your practice in conversation with the communities that you work within. I'm specifically as you're talking about with the miners.
Mm-hmm.
I was curious about, as an environmentalist who is also sharing these ideas and the way you described that was so beautiful, the shimmering thing and looking for that. But practically speaking, how do you have those conversations with those communities? How do you explain your practice?
Mm-hmm.
How do you navigate explaining what you're doing
Mm-hmm.
within the communities that you work with? Which is also related to your larger question just now of can you
Yeah. For the camera, the question is how I've entered into communities in a productive way, respectful way, I would say. I usually tell people I'm applying for a job, and if they give me one, I'll take it. Like, I would have been a gold miner, you know, just to learn and to develop more empathy, because we all use gold, you know, it's in our technology. And if they had been willing to hire me, I would have spent my summer being a gold miner. And I don't know if I'm an environmentalist the way that people use that word. I'm really grappling with that, because I believe that there's a over-exploitation and consumption that is plaguing humanity, especially Western humanity and this planet. But I also know that if we stopped mining right now, like your education, your university, your town, everything would collapse so quickly. And so I understand that we're living in an unsustainable system, but the system to be perpetuated has these elements. And so when I'm approaching miners or border patrol folks, that's what I'm saying. It's like, I need to learn about your system because I'm part of it. And there's a lot of, like, the spunky, weird Nina that you're seeing right now, it's a little different when I'm out in the field. I'm like wearing a hoodie and, you know, being like, hey, tell me what's going on. You know, I mean, I'm still goofy, but it's really more social research about learning from one another. And I think a big thing that I do too is I'm living in these places. I'm not like showing up for an afternoon. I will go for, you know, weeks and then come back the next year and be there for weeks and come back the next year and be there for weeks. And there's very few communities I've only worked in once, you know, and so people start to see me regularly and they think of me as part of the community. And I also tell people I ask people to tell me what they want me to talk about a lot. Because I tell them I do a lot of teaching and writing and public speaking. What are the stories that aren't getting told about what you do? And that's a pretty amazing way to get people to talk and to learn about the best of people and how they feel like they're perceived. And that's a very, very interesting approach. So I don't know, I ask a lot of questions, and I would take the job if someone allowed me to drive their bulldozer. I would try it, I guess. Anything else? Yes. Oh, that's Masayo. Hi.
It's really powerful watching this video because you can see how heavy and hot everything is. And then watching you take like this massive rock backpack, I was thinking about and wondering about how your body felt after this day. And like what reflection, if like new reflections came up after like, I don't know, I'm assuming that maybe you would have had sort of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the question was how I felt after making this work on the U.S.-Mexico border. I was very, very sore. I think I have a permanent scar on the top of my head from, oh, there we go. Yes, this moment of that. And I don't know if I can like talk about it without crying. I just had such an intense relationship to my privilege all of a sudden that I can like say, oh, I'm an artist. I can be here. And people will be like, turn a blind eye to whatever I'm doing. And at the end of me making this video, they said, oh, it's time for you to go. This is when all the aliens come across. And there's all these people with guns just ready to literally hunt immigrants. And I just could not. I still can't reckon with that difference of like that I'm allowed to access these places and make art about it, and other people, it would be legal to shoot them. And I don't know, working in this border area in the following weeks was just, it took on a totally different flavor because I just felt like I was in this double standard that had to do with race and nationality. And so incredible awareness of how I look. And I think that I didn't realize that making this video, to me, it was about how I felt. I wanted the video to capture how I felt. And then I'm seeing this and I'm seeing my body and some of that privilege being expressed, and I want to interrogate that. And some people have said that this looks like penance, and that I'm self-harming as an act of penance. I don't know how I feel about that yet. But I felt all of these conflicting feelings, and also the futility. I mean, it was just really sad. I cried so hard after I made this, because it was like, if I had had a place to take them, I would have. If I had a place to clean these rocks of their history, I would have. And no one does. That's why they've been turned into weapons, So it's a little bit sad. There was another question back in that area. I don't know. Oh, yeah, that was you. Mm-hmm. Thanks. Compassion's important. All right, I think we can take, we have lots of time, but I don't want to take a lot more time. Maybe 2 more questions. There was one over here. Yeah.
Hi. I thought it was really interesting to kind of look at your videos and the awkwardness of them, like how you're kind of like struggling to get the Velcro on, and it's like unbalanced on top of your head. And I was just like curious why you kind of, because it seems to depart from your other like, photography with like the crack on the sidewalk, which seems, a lot more, a lot less awkward. So I was just curious why you kind of went with that direction with your video art, and if it was like to kind of more accurately portray your experience.
Yes, that's exactly it. So the question was about awkwardness and representation, and this was the most awkward day of my entire life, I'll say that. Except for maybe learning how to backpack with crampons on. That was also an awkward day. I think I'm really changing as an artist. I think there used to be this desire to kind of depict and overwhelm people with the industrial presence in the world, and something I would call like industrial porn, or something like that, where it's like, wow, look at the spectacle of this ravaging those pit mines that I was showing early on. And I'm more and more realizing, like, to implicate ourselves and unsettle ourselves is like so awkward, and it's so strange, and it's so hard, and like there's this fraying. And so I'm really like invested in these like broken spaces. And in this work, my body wasn't functioning very well because it was too hot and it was too heavy. And it was like trying to find that way that I could embody the way that resources kind of malfunction under pressure. So I have a feeling I'll be getting a lot more smaller scale and personal in future work, and a lot more awkward, and yeah. So that's a great observation. One last question. Who wants to ask it? Or we don't even have to have a last question. Okay.
So I was wondering about the Anthropocene in like geologic terms. Apparently the geologists have defined it using the calcium deposits that have been left by all the chicken bones.
The Chickenocene.
Yeah. I was curious, like, whether you've encountered that in your work, because it has to do with like geology and like humans scarring the earth, using evidence of our existence. And I found that really interesting when I learned about it.
Yeah. So the question's about humans and geology and the Anthropocene. Yes, I've definitely heard of the Chickenocene, and I think it's interesting. I don't know. I agree. I 100% believe that we are in a human-made geologic era. I don't think it's impossible to deny, but I think if I were going to name it, I might name it the Pyrocene, because what started it all off was the burning of fuels and the burning of energy that belongs to other species, and the stealing of energy that belongs to other species, and it has resulted in forest fires and smoke and particulate accumulations in the atmosphere, all these things that we associate with fire. So it started with combustion, it ends with combustion. So I don't know if that answers a question, but it's something I think about a lot, and I'm really curious about, and I've never really talked about the Pyrocene with anybody else, but it's how I think about our era. And from motors to industry to fossil fuel dependence. It's all about taking and burning the power of others. So, well, I'm really thankful for all of your attention and showing up on a beautiful spring afternoon and spending time with me. And you can follow me on Instagram on my wild travels. I'm Nina Elder Artist. I looked up my handle. And yeah, I really am hoping to return to Eugene. You have amazing geologic and labor histories here that I'm like, why am I here so quickly? So yeah, keep in touch. So thank you all.